Let's apply our sentient FLD indicator to a chart, and there are a few details you should be aware of. So I clicked on this plus button, of course, to create a new chart. Let's choose an instrument. I'm going to choose the NASDAQ continuous. There we go. So you can choose any time frame. I'm going to focus initially on the standard time-based timeframes that are available in NinjaTrader. It is possible to apply the sentient FLD indicator to a non-time-based chart, but that is fairly experimental. You should be aware that Hurst cycles is based on the idea of cycles influencing price action over time. Hurst, of course, brings the concept of time into our analysis of the charts, and so applying Hurst cycles to a non-time-based chart is fairly experimental. When we are creating any of the standard time-based charts, daily, weekly, monthly, minute, second, then there are a few things you should be aware of. If we are going to load a daily chart, you will notice that by default, NinjaTrader on my installation is choosing 365 days. That is, of course, only 1 year's worth of data, and that is not really quite enough for the sentient FLD indicator to perform its analysis. And so if you're loading a daily chart, I would recommend that you load about 3 years worth of data. 1,000 days should be enough for you to perform a good analysis. Of course, you could also choose to count the number of bars or load data based on the number of bars, and in which case, if you're loading daily data, 50 days is definitely not enough. So again, you would want to type in 1,000 bars that you wish to load. If we are loading a shorter time frame chart, which we're going to do here, then let's load a 5-minute chart just for demonstration purposes. If you go and choose days for the amount of data to load, it will load 5 days, which is pretty good. You are probably going to have enough data to analyze, but as a general rule of thumb, because you might be working with 1-minute charts or 3-minute charts, I would choose not to load on the basis of the number of days that we are loading, but choose to load on the basis of the number of bars, and 1,000 is more than enough. We could probably get away with about 500. So between 500 and 1,000 bars is going to be good enough for the sentient FLD indicator to perform its analysis. For the purpose of this demonstration of the indicator, we're going to load 1,000 bars worth of data. I'll click on the OK button, and there is our 5-minute chart. Click on the indicator icon over here, and let's immediately add our sentient FLD indicator. We simply scroll down. The indicators are arranged in alphabetical order. Double click on sentient FLD, which will load it into the configured section for the chart. And for now, we are going to leave all of the inputs at their default values. We will be going through these inputs or properties and discussing them in more detail in future videos, but for now we're going to leave everything at the default value and click on the OK button. The indicator will take a few seconds to load up properly, and here you can see it displayed on the chart. Now let's sort out a few things before we go any further. First of all, notice all of this text up at the top of the chart. Those are the properties of the indicator. You really do not need those properties displayed at the top of the chart. It's just a whole lot of meaningless text. So what we're going to do immediately is correct that. Right click on the chart, select indicators, select the sentient FLD indicator if you have other indicators on your chart, and then we're going to scroll down here in the properties, and we're going to find the property for the label of the indicator. Here it is under the setup section, and we are going to select the label of the indicator, which is of course sentient FLD. Simply click on the cancel or delete button, so we delete the label, and then we click on OK again. The indicator will load up again, and you will notice that that text has disappeared. Let's sort something else out with this indicator before we go any further. You will notice at the top left is what we call the cycle table. Now, the color that has been defined for that cycle table is a fairly neutral slate gray, but it is a little too prominent for my liking. So the first thing that I like to do is, again, I right-click on the chart, select Indicators, select the Sentient FLD indicator, and you will notice on the right-hand side under Properties, the third group of properties are for the cycle table. If we then select the background color for the cycle table, you will notice here are all the standard colors, but NinjaTrader is displaying some interesting alternatives up at the top, which in this case will give me colors that match my chart colors, and that's what we really want. So I'm going to choose slate gray, but the version that is a background medium gray in NinjaTrader. I can adjust the background opacity of the cycle table, so if you do not want your bars of data shining through that cycle table, you can adjust your opacity, but I'm going to leave all of that for now and click on the OK button. And now we have a much more subtle cycle table up at the top of the chart. Let's adjust the size of this chart slightly. Let's just drag that down. We don't really need to see all of that detail. There we go. The next thing to notice about charts in NinjaTrader is that by default, the right-hand edge of the chart is right up at the margin, as you can see. And so the current bar is operating right over here. You can't see anything to the right of the price action. Now, the future line of demarcation, which is, of course, what the FLD is. FLD is an acronym for the future line of demarcation, is giving us information about what we could expect or anticipate for the future. And so the first thing we really need to do is we need to drag our chart over to the left, because we are interested in the information displayed to the right-hand edge of the chart. And there we go. We have set up our indicator for basic operation in NinjaTrader. Now let me quickly explain what information is presented to you. We are going to be delving in much greater detail into each of these pieces of information. But let's quickly go through an overview, if you like, of what the indicator is doing. First of all, you will notice that there are three lines that are plotted on the chart. This pink colored line, this orange colored line, and this green colored line. Those lines are all future lines of demarcation, or FLDs. Each one of those FLDs is based on a particular cycle. The cycle upon which the FLD is based will change according to the time frame that you are looking at. The cycle table up at the top left of the chart, and you can reposition that cycle table. That is a property that you can adjust. This cycle table is, you will see, color-coded by default, and it provides us with information about what cycle each one of these FLDs is based upon. So you will notice that the pink-colored cycle over here in the cycle column is for the 100-minute cycle. The orange FLD is for the 3-hour cycle, and the green FLD is for the 6-hour cycle. And so that is the first thing to observe about the chart, that we have three FLDs. We are interested in the way in which price is interacting with these three FLDs. We have the pink-colored cycle, which is called the signal cycle. The signal cycle is the most important cycle for each time frame. This is the cycle that gives us our signals. In other words, we make our trading decisions on the basis of the way in which price interacts with this signal cycle. A Hurst cycles analysis provides us with a complex puzzle of the way in which these cycles interact with one another. And so, although most of our attention is on the signal cycle, we are also interested in the next longer cycle, which is called the mid-cycle. And the third cycle that is presented on our charts is called the sequence cycle. Because of the fact that price very reliably interacts with all cycle FLDs following a particular sequence. We are going to be going into great detail about this in future videos. but it is the sequence of interactions between price and the FLD that will inform our trading decisions. And the sequence of interactions between price and the signal cycle FLD play out over a full wave of the sequence cycle. And that is why in the cycle table you will see that each one of the cycles, such as our signal cycle of 100 minutes, has in the next column displayed a sequence cycle. And so the 100-minute cycle provides us with information of price interactions which play out between price and the signal cycle FLD over a full wave of the sequence cycle, or in this case the 6-hour cycle. And so looking at a 5-minute chart, we would be trading the 100-minute cycle FLD, a sequence of interactions which will play out over a full 6-hour cycle. As a matter of interest, as I have been speaking, you will notice that price has dropped down to the signal cycle FLD. You will see here a label, BC. BC is the interaction that we are expecting. It is an interaction pair where the signal cycle is expected to provide support. As you will notice, price has in fact come down to this signal cycle, and it looks as if though it has so far found support at the level of this FLD. That is the power of the FLD indicator. The information in terms of us expecting support is presented both in terms of the label, indicating that a BC category interaction is expected between price and the FLD, and also by these arrows. Each one of these FLDs is expected to provide support, resistance, or an acceleration point for price. An acceleration point is where price succeeds in crossing the FLD. It accelerates beyond it, either above it or below it, to a point where it is expected to reach its target. And targets are the next really powerful piece of information that you will see displayed on your chart. For each and every cycle, you will notice that there are two targets. There is what is called the current target, which is the target generated by the most recent price interaction with that FLD. In this case, price, as you can see, crossed above the FLD at this point over here and generated this target over here. The other target that is displayed for each and every one of the 3 FLDs on your chart is this dashed target, or at least the arrow is dashed, and the cycle length is presented in brackets. As you can see, that is referred to as the previous target. These targets prove remarkably accurate, and you will discover them as you explore the indicator. Notice here how the previous target of the 3-hour cycle was met very exactly at this bar over here. Price then, of course, bounced up and out of a trough, which brings me to the next piece of information that is displayed by the sentient FLD indicator, which is the analysis information presented at the foot of the chart. Now, there are various ways of presenting this analysis, and in future videos we will be looking at those different ways. The default way of displaying the analysis is a notation developed by Hurst 50 years ago. The cycle troughs are marked by these diamonds on the chart. If you know nothing about Hurst cycles and what they are, that's no problem. We have a Hurst cycles primer as a part of the tutorial videos that you have access to for the sentient FLD indicator. It is important that you understand what a Hurst cycles analysis is and how it works. We're not going to go into detail here. The only thing that I will point out here is that one of the fundamental principles is that the cycles are synchronized at their troughs, which is why we get these little piles of diamonds. The topmost diamond in the pile marks the longest cycle that is forming a trough at this time. Here you can see a green diamond. What cycle is the green diamond for? Here it is in our cycle table. The green cycle is the 6-hour cycle. indicating that a 6-hour cycle trough has been found to have formed over here. Over here is a smaller stack of diamonds. The longer diamond in the stack is the orange colored diamond, which is of course our 3-hour cycle. And so we had a 3-hour cycle trough that formed over here. Notice very importantly that the 3-hour cycle trough formed at the same time that a 3-hour cycle target was reached. That important combination between the analysis and the achievement of targets is something that you are going to apply to your trading. While we're on the subject of targets, notice this 6-hour cycle target. It is lying a bit in the past. In other words, it hasn't been lined up to an actual price moment. The reason for that is because this target was not reached or has not yet been reached. And so the time at which that target has been placed is the target time. A target consists of price and time, and that combination provides us with the positioning of the target. So for this 6-hour target, we expected price to reach this level over here at this time. Notice, of course, that in our analysis, we have then found a 6-hour target over here. That target had a low price at about this level over here, so it didn't quite reach down to its target. That was a target that was not quite fulfilled. When we have a downside target that is not quite reached, that indicates not a failure of the analysis or the system, but it indicates that there is a little more bullishness than might be expected. When a target is reached and reached accurately, it indicates a balanced market. In other words, the cycle analysis is accurately reflecting the price action. When a target is not reached, it indicates a slight imbalance. In other words, the price action was not quite as bearish as might have been expected. Look, it's a really small difference between this level over here, which is where the target was, and the level that price actually reached. But that small difference gives us a subtle clue to the fact that this market was turning bullish. Over here is the next target for the 3-hour cycle. Notice again the position of the target in terms of time. We are expecting that target to be reached in about half an hour or 45 minutes. And here is where the exact price is for that target. So far, the market is looking good and it is looking fairly bullish. We had this slight discrepancy over here with the 6-hour cycle target not quite being reached. And since then, we have had a sequence of price interactions with our signal cycle that has made sense. Price has crossed above the signal cycle over here, generating this target. Do you notice something about this target? Price exceeded that target. When price exceeds a target, that indicates that there is bullishness in the market. Then price came down and it did indeed find support at the level of the signal cycle FLD at the time that the next cycle trough was expected. I'm going to speak in a moment about the symbol that we use to indicate when the next trough of a particular cycle is expected. So far, we are getting several things checking the box for the fact that price is bouncing out of a 6-hour cycle trough. We had price crossing the signal cycle FLD. It achieved its target. It exceeded its target. It came back down to the signal cycle FLD and found support. Everything is looking good. We could expect this 3-hour cycle target to be achieved. Notice also that the 6-hour cycle has now generated a target a little bit higher at this point over here. It's important to remember that not all targets are equal. This is something you will learn later on in this tutorial video course. For each time frame, we focus mostly on our signal cycle and our signal cycle targets. Our mid-cycle and our mid-cycle targets also prove very accurate. Our sequence cycle and sequence cycle targets are less accurate. They are often achieved, but you will often want to step up to a longer time frame to see the finer detail for that sequence cycle. Now, there is one other target that I would like to mention that is visible on this chart, and that is this longer time frame target. This target, as you can see, comes from the 15-minute time frame. That's the meaning of M15. These longer time frame targets are painted by default in a grey color. You can change the color in your properties. As I have been speaking, you will notice that the 15-minute chart has now generated a target to the upside. There it is over there. We will change timeframes in a moment and take a look at that 6-hour cycle target on that longer time frame. I promised that I would speak about the markers that we use to indicate when the next cycle troughs are expected. These are called circles and whiskers. The circle indicates the exact time at which the next trough of the cycle in question is expected. In this case, a pink-colored circle indicates the time at which the next 100-minute cycle trough was expected. If we look up as a matter of interest at the price action, you will notice that potentially a 100-minute cycle trough has formed at that time. Why has the indicator not positioned a diamond there? Because the indicator needs a little more information before it positions the diamond. I often say that diamonds are not the trader's best friend. The circles and whiskers are. The circles and whiskers tell us when we are expecting the next trough of a particular cycle. When we experience something that looks like a trough forming at that time, we are making our trading decisions. The diamonds are only positioned with the benefit of hindsight. Don't focus on the diamonds, except to provide information about what has happened in the past. What we are interested in is what is going to happen or what we could expect to happen in the future. Now, look at this formation over here where we have two circles and whiskers lined up above each other. First of all, what are the whiskers? I forgot to mention that. The whiskers are the lines that extend to each side of the circle. Those lines represent a reasonable range of time in which that cycle trough could be expected to form. And so the combination of the circle and the whiskers provides us with information about when we can expect a cycle trough to form. Notice here that these two circles and whiskers are lined up above one another because, as I have already mentioned, these cycles form troughs in price action that are synchronized. In other words, the troughs occur at the same time. And so here we have a combination of two circles and whiskers that are lined up above one another. That combination of multiple circles and whiskers is called a nest of lows, and it indicates a range of time in which we could expect the next trough of the longest cycle in the nest of lows to form. The longest cycle in this little nest of lows is the orange-colored cycle, which of course from our cycle table we know is the 3-hour cycle. And so we are expecting a trough of the 100-minute cycle to occur over here. That has probably now formed, and we are expecting the next 3-hour cycle trough to form over here a little bit after 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And that is the information that the Sentient FLD indicator displays. It is a lot of information. I know it is going to take you some time to understand all the intricacies and the details. But we have some very comprehensive tutorial videos lying ahead of us so that you can learn all of these details. For now, I would encourage you to play around, add the indicator to some charts, change time frames, take a look at the cycle table. Begin to understand what cycles are being analyzed for each time frame. Take a look at your cycle analysis. Understand why diamonds have been positioned where they have. Start looking at your nests of lows of your circles and whiskers. Start understanding how the FLDs are expected to provide support and also resistance and also acceleration points. Start looking at your targets. Observe how often these targets are reached. Let's change our time frame on this chart from a 5-minute chart to a 15-minute chart. You will notice that again NinjaTrader shoves the price action all the way over to the right, so we are going to scroll it left so that we can see a little more detail. Let's come a little further left so that we can get rid of that wide-ranging price move from yesterday. And let me take this opportunity to point something else out to you. You will notice that the price action is squeezed into the top half of the chart. That is because of some volatile price action yesterday. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to squeeze it over until we get it filling the chart. There we go. That looks a little bit better. If I want to fix my price axis there, I can right click on the Y axis and I can choose fixed instead of automatic, and there it is going to be displayed as a fixed price range. I can then drag it over to the left and I can see the price displayed a little more conveniently on my chart. This is of course the 15-minute chart. Here is the 6-hour cycle trough that we saw on the 5-minute chart. On the 15-minute chart, the 6-hour cycle is our signal cycle, our pink colored cycle, and that is why we are seeing that price marker over there. Here is our previous 12-hour cycle trough, and over here is our 5-day cycle trough. The price action is below the bottom of the chart, but that's okay, we're not focusing on that. Notice here the upward pointing arrows for our signal cycle. That is because this is expected to provide an acceleration point. In other words, price is expected to cross over the FLD at this point over here, provide us with a good clean price cross, and here is our 6-hour cycle target that we saw a moment ago on our 5-minute chart. Let's quickly take a look at some longer time frames. Here is a daily chart of the same instrument, the Nasdaq, and here you can see we have found a 20-week cycle trough over here in the middle of May. Look at these targets that were reached just as that 20-week cycle trough was forming in the market. Notice that the 20-day cycle peak was achieved. The target for the 20-day cycle was achieved just yesterday, and so quite possibly we're going to see a little bit of a reaction, but we do still have a 40-day cycle target up at the top, as well as a 20-week cycle target generated, as you can see, from the weekly chart. Here on the weekly chart we can see that 80-day cycle target. Here is the 20-week cycle trough that has been marked. What are we looking at next on the weekly chart? Here is a nest of lows for the 40-week cycle. Notice the green colored cycle is the 40-week cycle, and that is focused at the moment on August or perhaps into early September. So that's going to be our focus on the weekly chart. Let's complete the sequence by taking a very quick look at the monthly chart. Again, NinjaTrader has squeezed the price action all the way over to the right-hand edge. Let's scroll it back again. Here is the 6-year cycle trough that has been found in September of 2022. And here is the nest of lows on the monthly chart for the 18-month cycle trough that is expected later this year. But that's enough for now as an introduction to the Sentient FLD indicator and how to get it onto your charts and start working with it. In the next video, we're going to be focusing on the 3 FLDs that are displayed on our charts.